The morning she told me to use the back entrance, I did not say a word. I picked up my bag, I nodded politely, and I walked exactly where she pointed me. She stood there at the front desk with that small smile people use when they want you to know your place without actually saying it out loud. She had done this before, small things, quiet things, the kind of humiliation that leaves no marks, but lands exactly where it is meant to land. I had been coming to that building for 4 months. I had never once made a scene. I had never once raised my voice or pushed back or made her feel uncomfortable, even when she deserved it. I kept thinking she would stop. I kept thinking someone would notice. But nobody noticed because nobody was looking at me. They were all looking at her. And then one Tuesday morning, everything in that building shifted, and the look on her face when she finally understood who I was became something I will carry with me for a long time. Not with cruelty, but with the kind of quiet satisfaction that only comes when the truth finally arrives exactly on time. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something honestly. If someone in a position of small power decided to make your daily life uncomfortable, not in a dramatic way, not in a way you could easily report, but in that careful, calculated, just below the surface way, would you have stayed as quiet as Lousia did? Think about that while you listen. And if this story hits somewhere real for you, stay until the end, because the moment this woman finally understood what she had been doing to the wrong person is worth every minute of this. Lousia had never been the kind of woman who needed to be the loudest person in a room to feel good about herself. She had grown up watching her mother handle impossible situations with quiet precision, and somewhere along the way, she had learned that lesson deeply. Quiet did not mean weak, patient did not mean passive, and the ability to stay calm while other people unraveled was not a flaw. It was armor. She had spent most of her adult life understanding that, even when the world around her kept trying to convince her otherwise. She was 34 years old when the situation with Renata began. Lousia was working as an independent financial consultant at the time, which meant she worked for herself, set her own hours, and took on clients through referrals and professional relationships she had built carefully over nearly a decade. She was good at her work. She was precise, she was thorough, and she had a way of explaining complicated financial structures to people who were overwhelmed by numbers that made her clients feel safe. She had built that reputation slowly and honestly. Every client she had came to her because someone they trusted had said her name with confidence. Her husband, Marcus, ran a private investment and development group called Aldrin Capital. It was not a household name, but in the right circles, it was a name that carried significant weight. Marcus had started the company from almost nothing 12 years earlier, and by the time Lousia had met him through a mutual professional contact 7 years ago, he had already built it into something quietly powerful. Marcus was not the kind of man who put his face on billboards or chased press coverage. He preferred to let results speak. His employees were loyal, his partners trusted him deeply, and he made decisions with a calm and deliberate quality that Lousia had fallen in love with before she even fully understood it. They had married 4 years before this story begins, in a small ceremony with people they actually loved, and their life together was steady and warm. They did not perform happiness for social media. They did not compete with anyone. They had a home they had built together, a shared routine that felt like genuine comfort, and a mutual respect that had only grown stronger as years passed. Lousia did not walk around broadcasting who her husband was or what his company had achieved. It had never occurred to her to use his name as a shield. It was simply not how she was raised, and it was not who she was. The situation that changed things began because of a client referral. One of Lousia's longest-standing clients, a woman named Patricia, had recommended her to the financial director of a mid-sized firm called Veston Group. Veston was going through an internal restructuring period and needed an outside financial consultant to review several of their departmental budget processes and make recommendations. The contract was a significant one, the kind that would take months to complete properly, and would pay well enough that Lousia had cleared several other smaller commitments to take it seriously. She was brought in as an external consultant, which meant she was not an employee of Veston Group. She had no office of her own in the building. She worked from a temporary workspace they assigned to consultants, a quiet R. Near the back of the 3rd floor, and she came in 3 or 4 days a week to meet with department heads, review documents, and work through the financial data she had been given access to. Her point of contact for the administrative side of things, the scheduling, the building access, the meeting room bookings, was a woman named Renata. Renata was the executive assistant to Veston Group's CEO, a man named Gerald Forsyth. Gerald was rarely in the building. He traveled constantly and ran most of the company's high-level operations through calls, emails, and brief appearances. Renata, by extension, had filled the vacuum that Gerald's absence created. She had worked for him for 6 years, and in that time she had come to see herself as a kind of proxy authority inside Veston's office. She managed the front desk team. She controlled meeting room access. She decided who got into Gerald's calendar and who waited. She approved or delayed small internal requests. She had never been given any official authority over external consultants, but no one had told her that clearly enough, and so the gray space had become hers to fill. Lousia noticed Renata's behavior within the first 2 weeks. It started with small things. Lousia would submit a meeting room request through the internal system, and it would sit unconfirmed for hours, sometimes until the meeting time had already passed. Other consultants in the building had no such delays. Lousia would ask a straightforward question about a document she needed access to, and Renata would respond with a vague answer and a wait time that made no logical sense. When Lousia would arrive at the front desk to check in, Renata would let her stand there for longer than necessary before acknowledging her, always with a polite enough face, always with plausible deniability, always with the kind of pause that communicated exactly what it was meant to communicate. In the second week, Renata told Lousia that the consultant room on the 3rd floor was being used for internal purposes, and that Lousia would need to work from the smaller space near the loading dock on the ground floor for the next few days. Lousia asked politely when the 3rd floor room would be available again. Renata said she was not sure. The 3rd floor room sat empty for 3 of those days. Lousia saw it herself when she walked past on her way to a meeting. She did not say anything. She made a note of it privately and kept working. By the 3rd week, the dynamic had taken on a pattern clear enough to name. Renata treated Lousia differently than she treated anyone else in that building. She was not overtly rude. She never said anything that could be quoted directly as disrespectful. But the texture of how she behaved toward Lousia was distinct and consistent. She spoke to Lousia in a slower tone than she used with others, the kind of slow that implies the other person might not understand. She interrupted Lousia in group conversations and then smoothly redirected attention elsewhere. She once told Lousia in front of 2 junior employees that the coffee in the executive kitchen was for full-time staff, and that there was a machine on the ground floor Lousia could use, even though Lousia had seen other external contractors use the executive kitchen freely. Lousia thanked her, turned around, and went back to her desk without coffee. She noticed the junior employees exchange a glance. She asked herself during those early weeks whether she was being too sensitive. She ran the pattern back through her mind carefully. She was precise by nature, and she did not want to mistake ordinary rudeness for something targeted. But the consistency was too clear. Renata was sending a message. The message was, "You do not fully belong here. You are here on my tolerance, and your comfort in this building is something I control." Lousia did not know why Renata had decided this. She had never done anything to Renata. She had been nothing but polite. She had followed every request, even the unreasonable ones. She had not complained to anyone in the building about any of it. She had simply shown up, done her work with precision and care, and tried to stay out of everyone's way. She was not sure whether Renata disliked her specifically, or whether Renata simply enjoyed having someone in the building she could quietly make uncomfortable. Either answer was its own kind of sad. What Lousia did not do was tell Marcus. Not yet. They talked about work in the evenings, but Lousia was careful about how she shared frustrations. She did not want to walk through the front door every night and unload. She also knew how Marcus thought. He would want to solve it immediately. He would think of a dozen ways to make it stop, and Lousia was not ready for that yet. She wanted to handle it on her own terms first. She had handled harder things alone before. By the 4th week, the behavior escalated in a way that Lousia had not fully expected. Veston Group had a monthly internal briefing meeting, a larger gathering that included department heads, the senior consultants, a few external partners, and anyone whose work was directly connected to the company's ongoing operations. As a consultant working on the budget restructuring project, Lousia had been told when she started that she would be included in these briefings. It was standard. Her work touched multiple departments and she needed the updates. The morning of the briefing, Renata sent Lousia an email at 7:45 in the morning, just over an hour before the meeting was scheduled to start. The email said the meeting had been moved to a smaller conference room and that seating was limited to essential attendees. It said that as an external consultant, Lousia was not included in the rescheduled format and that she would receive meeting notes afterward. Lousia read the email twice. She walked to the building anyway and arrived just before 9. She checked with one of the department heads she had worked closely with, a thoughtful and direct man named Paul, and asked him whether the meeting had changed. Paul looked at her with visible confusion. He told her the meeting was in the usual conference room, the large one on the second floor, and that nothing had changed. Lousia thanked him and told him she had received a message that the format had shifted. Paul said he had heard nothing about that. He told her to come in and sit wherever she liked. Lousia walked into the briefing. Renata was already there near the door, managing the sign-in sheet. The moment Renata saw Lousia, her expression shifted slightly, just enough to be readable by someone paying attention. She said nothing. She did not block Lousia from entering. She simply marked her name on the sheet with a careful blankness that said she was recalibrating. Lousia sat down near Paul. The meeting proceeded. She took her notes and contributed exactly where her work was relevant. After the meeting, Lousia went back to her workspace on the third floor and sat quietly for a long moment. She had not imagined the email. She had it on her phone. She had not imagined the empty meeting room or the unreturned meeting requests or the coffee comment or the back entrance instruction or any of the other small calculated acts of social pressure Renata had been applying for a month. She was not imagining things, and she was not going to keep treating this like background noise. She did not go to Gerald, because Gerald was nearly impossible to reach, and her contract was not through him directly anyway. She thought about speaking with the HR contact at Veston, a quiet and organized woman named Dana. She decided to wait one more week and see whether the briefing incident was enough to signal to Renata that her approach was not working. She was still trying to give the situation room to correct itself. That was her nature. It was not weakness. It was the last stage of patience before she made a real move. The one more week did not bring improvement. It brought the morning Renata told her to use the back entrance. That was the incident Lousia had described at the very beginning of this story. She had arrived at the building at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning, approached the front entrance the way she always did, and Renata had been standing at the front desk visible through the glass. When Lousia pushed through the door, Renata had walked over and told her, with complete composure and a small office smile, that contractors were being asked to use the side access entrance near the loading area to help manage traffic flow in the main lobby during a temporary adjustment period. She said it as if she were reading from a policy document. She said it as if it were entirely reasonable. She said it while two actual Veston employees walked through the front entrance without being directed anywhere. Lousia looked at her for a moment. She looked at the two employees who had just walked in without being stopped. She looked back at Renata. She said she understood, thanked her, and walked inside the building through the front door the way she had entered every single day. She did not use the back entrance. She went upstairs, sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and spent 40 minutes writing down every incident she could recall in chronological order with dates, times, and as much specific language as she could reconstruct. She had been keeping mental notes. Now she turned them into written ones. She saved the document in 3 places. That evening, she told Marcus about it. She did not dramatize it. She did not ask him to fix it. She told him the full pattern calmly, the way she would describe a financial discrepancy she had found in a report. She told him what Renata had been doing, what the cumulative effect felt like, and what she was planning to do next. Marcus listened the way he always listened, completely, without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he asked her what she needed from him. She told him she was going to speak with Dana in HR and document the pattern formally. She asked him to simply let her handle it her way. He said he trusted her completely. He said one other thing before the conversation ended, which was that he had actually been waiting to mention something related to Veston Group himself, but that it could wait until she was ready to hear it. She asked him what it was. He told her that Aldrin Capital had been in quiet discussions with Veston Group's board for several weeks about a potential investment partnership, and that things had progressed further than he had initially expected. She looked at him. He said it calmly and without drama, the way he always said important things. She absorbed that information and then filed it quietly in her mind next to everything else. The next morning, she went to Dana. She presented her written document. She was clear, she was organized, and she was factual. She did not use emotional language. She listed each incident with the date and the context. She included the email about the briefing meeting, which she forwarded to Dana from her phone while they sat together. Dana read through everything with a focused expression. She asked several clarifying questions. Lousia answered each one directly. Dana thanked her and said she would begin a review process, speak with relevant staff, and follow up within the week. Lousia thanked her and went back to her desk. She did not know what happened in the conversations Dana had with Renata after that. She was not included in those conversations. But she noticed that within 2 days, the meeting room requests she submitted were confirmed within 30 minutes. She noticed that when she arrived at the front desk, Renata acknowledged her without the engineered pause. The back entrance instruction was never mentioned again. The executive coffee machine was never brought up again. The small, layered, calculated pressure simply stopped, not because Renata had suddenly become a different person, but because someone with authority had said something to her in a room Lousia was not in. Lousia noticed the change and kept working. She did not gloat. She did not go out of her way to be visibly warm to Renata as a performance of forgiveness. She was simply professional. That was enough. She had a budget restructuring project to complete, and she was going to do it well. It was 3 weeks after the HR meeting, on a Wednesday morning, that everything shifted in a way even Lousia had not fully anticipated. She knew Marcus had told her about the Aldrin Capital discussions with Veston's board. She had filed that information away. She had not fully connected it yet to what was about to happen inside that building. Marcus had called her on Tuesday evening to mention that the partnership agreement between Aldrin Capital and Veston Group had been finalized. The board meeting to officially confirm and announce the investment partnership was scheduled for Thursday morning. The investment represented a restructuring of Veston's operational model that would affect several of their internal departments. And as a condition of the partnership, Aldrin Capital had requested that an independent financial review of Veston's departmental budget structures be presented at the board meeting as part of the transition documentation. That review was Lousia's project, the exact work she had been doing for the past 4 months. She asked Marcus if he had known, when she was first brought in, that this review would become part of the Aldrin partnership documentation. He said no. He said when she had first mentioned the Veston contract, he had thought nothing of it beyond being glad she had good work coming in. The partnership discussions had only become serious in the past 2 months, and by then, her work at Veston was already underway. The connection had grown naturally. He had mentioned it to Veston's CFO, who had then recognized that Lousia's work was exactly what the board documentation required. No one had planned it that way from the start, but that was how it had landed. Lousia sat with that information for a long moment. Then she went back to her project files and spent 2 evenings making sure everything was in perfect order. She had already been doing strong work. She simply made sure every layer of the analysis was airtight for a board-level audience. Thursday morning arrived. Lousia came to the building at her usual time. She was dressed the way she always dressed, professional and clean, not trying to signal anything or perform for anyone. She had her materials organized and her laptop ready. She came through the front entrance. Renata was at the front desk. Something was different that morning. The energy in the building was elevated. There were several people in the lobby that Lousia had not seen before, men and women in sharp professional clothes carrying the particular kind of focus. Calm that belongs to people who have arrived to do something consequential. Lousia recognized a few of them from Aldrin Capital's staff. She had met some of them at company events over the years. She nodded to the ones she made eye contact with. They nodded back warmly. Renata was watching this from behind the front desk. Her expression had shifted into something that was working hard to stay composed. She was processing what she was seeing, the quiet woman who used the consultant workspace upstairs, the woman she had redirected to the back entrance, the woman she had excluded from a meeting with a fabricated email, apparently knew these people. Not just knew them, was being greeted by them. One of Marcus's senior partners, a tall and straightforward man named David, spotted Lousia from across the lobby and walked directly toward her. He greeted her with the easy familiarity of someone who had had dinner at her home. He asked if Marcus had arrived yet. Lousia said he was parking. David laughed and said Marcus was always parking right before something important. He said it with the warmth of someone who had worked beside a person for a long time. Renata could not hear every word from where she stood, but she could see the body language clearly. She could see that David had come to Lousia, not the other way around. She could see that the conversation was natural and mutual. She could see that Lousia was relaxed and comfortable in a way that did not match the version of Lousia she had constructed in her own mind. The version in her mind was a low-level outside contractor who could be quietly managed and redirected. That version was dissolving in real time. Marcus arrived 8 minutes later. He came through the front door with 2 members of his team and Gerald, Veston's CEO, who had flown in specifically for this board meeting, and who was speaking with Marcus in the way people speak with someone whose opinion they respect enormously. Gerald was animated and focused. Marcus was calm and precise. They were mid-conversation, and both looked like men who were exactly where they expected to be. Marcus saw Lousia near the lobby and his face shifted into the particular warmth he reserved specifically for her. He crossed the lobby, greeted her with a hand on her back, and said good morning in a way that was quiet and genuine and entirely unperformative. Gerald extended his hand to Lousia and told her he had heard extremely strong things about her analysis and that he was looking forward to her presentation at the board session. He said her work was going to be a central part of the documentation. He said it with the seriousness of a man who genuinely meant it. Renata was still at the front desk. She was watching all of this happen. There was no more small smile. There was no composure adjustment. There was only the slow and clearly uncomfortable recognition of what she was seeing. Someone from the Veston administrative team, a junior coordinator named Sasha, came to escort Lousia and the Aldrin Capital Group upstairs to the board meeting room. Sasha was efficient and kind and had always been respectful to Lousia in the months she had worked there. Lousia thanked her and followed the group toward the elevators. As she passed the front desk, she and Renata made direct eye contact for a moment. Lousia held it briefly. She did not smile pointedly or narrow her eyes or perform any kind of moment. She simply looked at her the way she would look at any person in that lobby, steady and clear. Then she walked to the elevator. That look lasted approximately 3 seconds. It did not need to be longer. The board meeting ran for 2.5 hours. Lousia presented her analysis in the second segment of the session. She was organized, she was precise, and she answered every follow-up question from the board members with the calm fluency of someone who had lived inside that data for months. When she finished, the response from the room was quiet and focused in the way that good boardrooms respond to good work. 2 board members asked follow-up questions that showed they had been paying close attention. Gerald thanked her formally. Marcus looked at her from across the table with an expression that said exactly what it meant. She walked out of that room feeling the specific satisfaction of work done at the highest level she could give it. Not because of what anyone now knew about who her husband was. Not because of what Renata had seen in the lobby. But because she had come into that building every week for 4 months, absorbed treatment that was designed to make her feel smaller than she was, kept doing her work with precision and care, and now stood in a room where that work had mattered at the highest level available. The dignity was in the work. It had always been in the work. But the story does not end at the board meeting. That is not where the full weight of the consequences landed for Renata, and it is not where Lousia's most important decisions were made. The events that followed over the next several weeks were in many ways more meaningful than the lobby moment, because they showed not just who Lousia was in a single morning, but who she had chosen to become across an entire experience. The day after the board meeting, Lousia received an email from Gerald's office. He was requesting a one-on-one conversation with her at her earliest convenience. She replied and scheduled it for the following Monday. When she arrived for that meeting, Gerald was seated and prepared and came directly to the point. He had reviewed the full chain of events regarding her experience with his administrative staff. He had read Dana's HR documentation. He said he was embarrassed, and he said it plainly without softening it too much or dressing it up in corporate language. He told her that the treatment she had described and documented was not consistent with how Veston Group wanted to operate, and that it would not continue. He asked whether she felt her ability to complete her remaining work had been compromised. She told him honestly that the HR process had corrected the immediate issues and that her work had not been materially impacted. She said it without false warmth and without exaggerating the damage. She was honest because she was always honest. Gerald said one more thing before they ended the meeting. He said that based on her work product and what Marcus had shared with him about her professional background, he was interested in discussing a longer engagement with Veston once the Aldrin partnership officially restructured the company's operations. He said this without connecting it to any obligation she might feel because of Marcus. He said it specifically because of her work. She thanked him and said she would be open to that conversation when the time was right. She meant it. It was a genuine response, not a performance of graciousness. She left that office and walked back through the building and past the front desk. Renata was not there that morning. Lousia found out from Sasha later in the week that Renata had been formally reprimanded and moved to a different administrative role within the company, one that did not involve front-of-building authority or control over external consultant access. It was not a termination. It was a structural consequence. Lousia had not asked for any specific outcome. She had documented the truth and let the people with authority decide what to do with it. She thought about Renata sometimes in the weeks that followed, not with anger, because the anger had mostly passed by the time things reached their conclusion. She thought about what it must feel like to be the kind of person who uses a position of small power to make someone feel smaller, and then to watch that approach collapse so completely. She did not feel triumphant about it in a loud way. She felt something quieter than that, something closer to the feeling of being proved right about a belief she had held her whole life, which was that dignity is not something another person can take from you permanently. It can be pressured. It can be made uncomfortable, but it cannot be taken. It lives in how you carry yourself when no one important is watching. The Aldrin Capital and Veston Group partnership moved forward through the following months, and Lousia's budget restructuring analysis became a core document in the operational transition plan. She completed her original contract on time and to the standard she had set for herself from the first day. She had 3 follow-up conversations with Gerald's team about next steps, and she accepted a second consulting engagement with Veston for the following quarter. It was professional and clearly connected to the quality of what she had delivered. She never once asked Marcus to advocate for her inside any of those conversations. She did not need to. The work had already done it. Marcus knew the full picture by now, of course. He had seen the lobby moment. He had known about the HR process. He had heard Lousia's account of everything that had happened across those months. He told her once, not dramatically but with real feeling, that he thought she was one of the most genuinely strong people he had ever known. Not because of the outcome. Not because Renata had been moved to another role or because Gerald had apologized. But because Lousia had chosen, month after month, to stay focused on what was real and valuable, without letting someone else's behavior reduce her to something reactive and small. He said that kind of self-possession was genuinely rare. She had laughed a little and told him he was biased because he loved her. He said both things could be true at the same time. They could. There is a version of this story where the lobby moment is the emotional peak, where the point is simply that Renata found out who Marcus was and felt the immediate impact of her mistake. That version is satisfying in a surface way. It gives you a clear moment of reversal. It has a recognizable shape, but Lousia had not lived inside a story about Renata's mistake. She had lived inside a story about her own choices, and the choices that mattered most were not the ones made on the Thursday morning when Marcus walked through that lobby. They were the choices made on every quiet morning before that one, when Lousia had gotten up, gotten dressed, walked into a building where someone had decided to treat her poorly, and done her work anyway with full seriousness and full care. She thought about the document she had typed that Tuesday morning after the back entrance incident. 40 minutes of precise, calm note-taking. She had not drafted it in fury. She had drafted it with the same focused attention she brought to a financial analysis. She had said to herself, as she typed, that she was not going to absorb this. She was not going to normalize it or wait for it to stop on its own or tell herself it was not really happening. She was going to name it, record it, and present it to someone with the authority to address it. That decision, made quietly at a desk near the back of the 3rd floor while the rest of the building went on around her, was the most important thing she did in this entire story. She did not need Marcus in the lobby to make that decision right. The decision had already been made. The lobby was simply the universe rearranging itself around a woman who had already chosen to stop being quiet about something that was not acceptable. The universe does that sometimes, not always on schedule, not always dramatically, but it does it. Lousia had learned to trust that more than she used to. There was one more thing that happened, smaller in scale but meaningful in a personal way, that Lousia thought about more often than the board meeting or the Gerald conversation. It happened on a Friday afternoon near the end of her first contract, when she was packing up her temporary workspace for the last time before the holiday break. She was moving things into her bag, shutting down her laptop, doing the last small administrative things that mark the end of a work period. Sasha came up to say goodbye and to wish her well. They had spoken easily in the months of Lousia's time there, friendly and natural in the way that sometimes happens with people you see regularly without being formally connected. Sasha said she hoped Lousia would come back for the next engagement and that it had been good to have her around. She paused for a second and then said she wanted Lousia to know that she had noticed what was happening in those early weeks, the meeting room delays, and the other things. She said she had not known how to say anything at the time, and she felt she should have. She said she was glad things had changed. Lousia thanked her. She meant it fully. She told her that sometimes just being seen, even when no one says anything yet, is its own kind of support. Sasha nodded and they said goodbye. That conversation stayed with Lousia because it reminded her of something she had to keep relearning. When someone is being quietly diminished, the people around them often see it. They are not always blind. Sometimes they are scared or uncertain or unsure of their own standing. Sometimes they are waiting for the person in the center of it to name it first before they can offer anything. It is an imperfect world made of imperfect responses. What Lousia had done was name it herself, not for the audience, not to create a moment, but because it was the right thing to do and because she owed it to herself to take her own experience seriously. She drove home that Friday with a feeling she did not have a single clean word for. It was not triumph. It was not relief exactly, though there was some of that. It was closer to the feeling of having been tested for a long time in a way that no one arranged on purpose, tested by circumstance and by another person's behavior and by her own deep habit of staying quiet, and having come through it without losing herself. She was still the same woman. She was still precise and careful and loyal and slow to create unnecessary conflict. But she was also clearer now about what unnecessary quiet could cost her if she let it run too long. That was the real thing she took from this experience, not the lobby moment, not the board meeting, not Gerald's apology. The real thing was the clarity she had arrived at about her own value and her own willingness to protect it. Marcus was cooking when she got home. The kitchen smelled good and familiar, and the light was warm, and she stood in the doorway for a moment just being in it. He looked up and asked how the last day went. She told him it went well. She told him about the conversation with Sasha. He listened the way he always listened. Then he said dinner would be ready in 20 minutes and asked if she wanted to sit down. She said yes. She put her bag down and sat at the kitchen table and looked out the window at the late afternoon light. It was a perfectly ordinary moment. It was exactly enough. Lousia was not a woman who needed dramatic vindication to know her own worth. She had needed for a while to remember that her worth did not depend on whether someone like Renata chose to see it. The moments that had tested her were real. The discomfort had been real. The pattern had been real. But none of it had fundamentally changed who she was, and that, she understood sitting in her kitchen that Friday evening, was the actual victory. You can disrespect someone's time, their access, their space, their comfort. but you cannot reach into who they are and rearrange it. You can only reveal your own character in the trying. Renata had revealed hers. And in doing so, she had given Lousia something she would not have thought to ask for, a clear and vivid reminder of how much she had built, how well she worked, how steady she was, and how little she actually needed anyone's small approval to prove any of it. She had spent some time earlier in life chasing a version of success that was measured by whether the right people in the right rooms were nodding at her. She had done the slow and sometimes painful work of letting go of that measure. This experience had confirmed she was further along that road than she had realized. She had walked into a building every week for 4 months, been treated poorly by someone who controlled a small piece of that building's daily administration, documented what was happening with complete calm, presented it through the proper channel, done her work at board level, and come home to a kitchen that smelled like home. That was the whole shape of it. That was everything. She did not need a different story. This one was already hers. The work she had done at Veston continued to carry weight in the months following her first contract's completion. The partnership between Aldrin Capital and Veston Group deepened, and Lousia's budget restructuring analysis was referenced multiple times in the internal documentation that guided the operational changes the companies were making together. She heard this from Gerald's office directly. She had not placed that work in the room expecting anyone to call her name. She had placed it there because it was the right work done at the right standard. The name-calling happened anyway, not as a reward, but as a natural consequence. Her second consulting engagement at Veston began in January of the following year. She came back to the building through the front entrance on a Monday morning. Sasha was at the front desk that day, filling in. She greeted Lousia with a warm and easy hello. Lousia returned it the same way. She walked upstairs to a proper consultant office this time, not the temporary workspace near the back. It had a window. The light in the morning came in at a good angle. She sat down, opened her laptop, and began. It was exactly that simple. There was no fanfare. There was no audience. There was only the work, the window, and a woman who had decided a long time ago that showing up fully was more powerful than performing loudly. She had been right about that. She was still right about it. She intended to stay right about it for a long time. In the weeks that followed the start of her second contract, Lousia settled into a productive and genuinely positive rhythm at Veston. The administrative landscape of the building felt different, not just because of the structural changes that had followed the HR process, but because the energy in the corridors had shifted in a subtle way that is hard to name precisely, but very easy to feel. When someone who has been using invisible pressure to manage the space around them is removed from that role, the air in the space often changes. People breathe a little more easily. Conversations that had been slightly careful become slightly more open. Lousia noticed this and found it interesting. She had not expected to feel the difference so physically. She worked closely with Paul again across the second contract, as his department was directly involved in the operational restructuring that her analysis was helping to guide. Paul was straightforward and smart, and had a practical mind that appreciated Lousia's precision. They developed a strong working rapport across that period, the kind that develops between two professionals who simply respect how the other one thinks. He told her once, directly and without preamble, that her instinct for finding where the numbers told a different story than the assumptions people had built around them was the most valuable thing she brought to the room. She told him that was the kindest thing anyone had said about her work in a while. He said it should not be rare. She agreed that it should not. The Aldrin Capital partnership continued to move through its structured phases, and Marcus remained a presence at Veston at a high level, though his day-to-day. Visibility in the building was limited to board touchpoints and quarterly reviews. He and Lousia were careful to maintain clear professional boundaries around the fact that she was engaged with Veston independently, not as an extension of his company's involvement. This was not a performance of separation. It was a genuine value both of them held. She had built her professional reputation through her own work and her own relationships, and she was not interested in any arrangement that blurred that. Marcus felt exactly the same way. Their professional lives overlapped in this particular season in a way that felt natural and clear, but neither of them used the overlap as a shortcut to anything. They had not built what they had built together by taking shortcuts. By the end of the second contract, Lousia's engagement with Veston had produced concrete and demonstrable results. The operational cost analysis she had delivered had identified redundancies that Gerald's team moved to address within the quarter. The departmental budget restructuring she had mapped out was being used as the implementation framework for the Aldrin Partnership's operational phase. Her work had not just sat in a document. It had moved. It had changed things. That was the kind of work she had always wanted to do, and now she was doing it at a scale that felt genuinely significant. Gerald offered her a third engagement. She accepted it with a timeline and scope agreement that felt fair and well-defined. She was not rushing toward anything, and she was not holding back. She was simply moving at the pace that good work requires when it is built to last. In the small margins of those busy months, Lousia had also found herself thinking differently about certain patterns she carried from earlier in her life. The experience with Renata had been uncomfortable and at moments genuinely demoralizing, but it had also functioned as a kind of clarifying lens. It had shown her exactly how she behaved when she was being pressured in a low-stakes but emotionally significant way. She had stayed quiet longer than she should have. She had kept giving the situation room to fix itself past the point where that patience was serving her. She had filed mental notes instead of written ones for too many weeks. She had moved when she finally moved, but she had moved later than she might have if she had trusted her own clear observation sooner. She did not punish herself for any of that. She had done the best she could with the information and emotional resources she had in each moment. But she also did not pretend she had handled it perfectly from the start, because she had not, and she was a woman who valued precision too much to soften her own self-assessment when it called for honesty. The lesson was simple. She had learned to trust what she observed, not what she wished were true. Not what the polite fiction of professional spaces asked her to pretend. What she actually saw, consistently and clearly, over time. Her observations had been correct from the beginning. The only thing she would change, if she could, was the speed at which she acted on them. That lesson became something she held onto quietly in the months and years after. She referenced it when she needed to. When she sensed something in a professional or personal situation that her instincts named clearly but her patience wanted to soften, she would think of that 40 minutes at her desk, typing calmly, naming what had happened without drama, and sending it forward. She would remind herself that naming a true thing calmly is not aggression. It is not creating conflict for its own sake. It is simply treating your own experience with the respect it deserves. She had always known that in theory. She understood it differently now in practice. She was 35 years old as her second contract at Veston wound to its close. She had built something real across the years of her professional life, something that was hers in a clean and unambiguous way. She had clients who trusted her because she had earned that trust consistently. She had a reputation that traveled before her into rooms she had not yet entered. She had a marriage that was steady and warm and genuinely mutual. She had a home that felt like the right container for the life she was living. She had handled one of the more difficult interpersonal challenges of her professional life with patience, precision, and eventually real strength. And she had arrived at the other side of it not diminished, not hardened, not changed into someone who expected the worst from everyone, but simply clearer. She was a clearer version of herself than she had been the year before. That felt like the truest kind of progress, the kind that does not make noise when it arrives. There was an afternoon in early spring, near the end of the second contract's final week, when Lousia took a different route back through the building on her way out. She passed through the main lobby on her way to the front door. The lobby was quieter than usual. The afternoon light was coming through the large glass front at a low angle, the kind of light that turns everything gold for about 20 minutes before it tilts away. There was no one at the front desk in that particular moment. The lobby felt still. She walked through it and pushed open the front door and stepped outside into that gold late afternoon air. She did not pause dramatically on the step. She did not look back through the glass. She simply walked forward toward the parking area, her bag on her shoulder, her keys in her hand, moving at the ordinary pace of a woman going home at the end of a workday. A woman who had come through something quietly and come through it fully. A woman who had learned that the most important entrance she would ever use in that building was not the front one or the back one. It was the one she had chosen for herself, every single day, in the decisions she made about how much her own dignity was worth protecting, and how little she was willing to let someone else's small cruelty define her experience of a place where she had done real and lasting work. That was the entrance, and she had never once been told to use the back of it. Before you go, I want to sit with you in this for just a moment. Lousia did not need the lobby moment to know she had value. She had known that every single day she came into that building and did her work with full seriousness, even when someone was quietly trying to make her feel like she did not quite belong there. If you have ever been in a space where someone used small power to make you feel smaller than you are, I want to ask you honestly, how long did you wait before you named it? Not because waiting makes you weak, but because I think a lot of us wait longer than we should, and this story might be the permission some of you needed to trust your own clear observation a little sooner. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have written that document? Would you have stayed quiet longer? I want to know where you are in that journey, because so many people watching this are in the middle of it right now.